Welcome to the second edition of the Ask Me Anything. And just to introduce myself as well before Phil joins, because I can save some time, because Phil knows me quite well. I'm an alumni of Consalia's level 6 degree apprenticeship program, and then I joined in November. So I've been here 3 or 4 months, really enjoying it. And as I mentioned, with my role being similar to Jane's, I'm our business development manager for apprenticeships. So it's an interesting session to be involved in, to talk to Phil about, some of the things we've got on the agenda today. One being the sort of the value of relationships and relationship capital. We've also got a couple of questions from one of our very new students who's joined our apprenticeship essentially straight out of school. He's done a couple of apprenticeships before, but it's his first full-on sales job. So he's got questions for Phil around advice for people coming into the sales profession, which I hope's useful to anyone at any stage of their career. Phil, good to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you, Luke. And sounds like you did a great job holding fort. Yeah, sorry to put you under that pressure.
That's all right. It's good fun.
Yeah.
I mean, Jane's what should we say, a repeat customer. Jane's back from last time, which is good.
Great.
Says we maybe did it right. I don't know if Ian was on the last one, but we've got Ian Jones on the call with us as well.
And definitely was.
And Ian was, yeah, and he submitted a question again today for you.
Yeah, thank you.
But for those joining who haven't been on before, just an open forum, really, a chance for you to ask questions to Phil about the sales profession, what's going on today. And, we try and give a lot of insight at Consalia, but this allows us to be a bit more specific to you. So I hope you're ready, Phil.
I am slightly worried about the questions, as I was indeed last time as well. So
I won't freewheel as much as Will did.
As Will did. Thank you for that.
The first question comes from Garth Sutherland at Garth Sue. Oh, yeah. And Garth is asking us about relationship capital. So for those unfamiliar with the topic of relationship capital, it's simply I suppose the value of your relationships, isn't it, Phil?
Yes, he was alluding to the idea of putting the value of particularly key accounts. How could you put a value of those key accounts, but perhaps on the balance sheet of an organization? And I think his question was around how do you do that? But I'm not other listeners understand quite why he asked the question, which is quite, perhaps like you were saying, it's best to go back before we go forward with the answer on that. So do you want me to continue on, Luke, with the question he was posing, or do you?
Yeah, well, let me pose this question as he asked it, just for context to the listeners. So Garth said, I fully understand the reason for attempting to bring the value of relationships onto the balance sheet.
Yeah.
I am a marketing person and fully understand bringing the value of intangibles onto the company's worth. The brand value always plays a specific role. Speaking to accountants on the topic, they do understand and are comfortable with intangible assets. In conversations with those same accountants, they ask, how do you value those relationships? So they understand the concept, but accountants always want a numerical figure. I have read many of your articles available on relationship capitalization, including the academic papers and dissertations, but I cannot find any simple set of points that explains the how. There is a lot of reasoning and justification, all of which makes sense, but the how escapes me. Can you assist in finding me an answer to that?
Well, it's not going to be an easy one to answer very, very simply, because the only time at which you are legally required to put a value on your customer base is essentially at the point that a company is being sold. Up to that point, there's no reason for accountants to put a value, but it's done at the point of sale, because part of the value that you build into a business is based on the goodwill that you have with your customer base. So I think the reason why accountants aren't familiar with it is because it's not something that happens every day. It's not part of what they do. And there are specialists involved out there whose job it is to put a value on intangible assets. And when I've spent time talking to them about this specific point, about how do you put a value, they are a little vague in how they, in how they say they compute the value of customers. They look at data, they look at sales data, they look at trend data, they look at who are the key accounts, they look at benchmarking the value of similar companies perhaps that have been sold, and previous valuations done around the value of clients, and they pool all of this data into what they call net present value calculations. It's where you take the value of an account. Let's take a single account. You look at its expected earnings over a period of time, and then you discount the value according to the amount of risk associated with whether that account is going to be there in 5-10 years' time. And the risk value is rather arbitrary. Now, how do you put a risk value against an account? So if you've got an account that you've had for 50 years, now you could argue that it's highly likely that that account will continue to be a client moving forward. What also happens is so risk, the risk element is a component of the net present value calculation, the discount rate that's applied to future earnings. So I don't know how much more detail I need to go to, but this is the reason why specialists get involved. There are legal legal frameworks or accounting frameworks, IFRS standards that are set to enable accountants to follow a sort of a set of principles, but it's so highly specialized. You need a intangible asset expert, to do the valuation. So I'm not surprised that Gareth has actually said that it's the accountants don't know the answer, because it is such a specialized area. What we've done here at Consalio to address this particular topic, because I'm interested in putting a value against our key accounts, irrespective of whether the company's sold or not. And the rationale that we're using to come up with our calculation of value is where we take the account, we take what is contracted sales value over the next 2 to 3 years, and then we multiply that by a discount rate, which takes into account inflation, and it takes into account the risk that we would be associated with that account, which has to do with our level of relationships, the quantity of relationships that we have with the account, and so on. So we've formulated our own formula for doing it, but it's not something that we can give to the accountants to then say this is the value of our account based on the balance sheet. But I'm doing it just from our perspective, because some of the KPIs you can set for your key accounts can be influenced by the metrics that you build into the calculation. Luke, have I confused you, or are you okay with what I've shared?
Well, I've read a lot of your work that you've done with IntraHive.
Yes.
So I'm lucky in that sense. I think to perhaps bring it back to the salesperson level, because you talk at the strategic level. For me, relationship capital is fundamental for the value I bring to the organization I sell for.
Yeah.
Because when you join a company, so I'm new to Consalia, and I'm looking to develop new relationships with clients, therefore increase the relationship capital I have with organizations you don't already have. But if I'm to do a good job as a salesperson, I need to develop the relationship they have with the brand Consalia, not just with me.
Yeah.
Because if I go out as a salesperson, and it's great that people buy from people, but you don't really bring value to your organization if you're not selling the brand to the customer.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. But there's a difference between relationship capital in the way that you used it and relationship capitalization. Relationship capitalization is the process of putting the value on the balance sheet, but relationship capital, one can talk about sort of in a general sense. And I think the pandemic, I think Ian has asked another question about loyalty and the sort of pandemic and what it's done to, with loyalty, is that the question that one could ask, similar to what you've done, is, has, for example, the pandemic increased or decreased the relationship capital you have with your key accounts? And a lot of that has to do with how well you've looked after those accounts through what has probably been quite a stressful and difficult time. So yeah, it's a really big question, I think.
Good question. When I think of pandemic and loyalty, the phrase I always think of is the companies that blame COVID. There came a time where sorry because of COVID that expired. People couldn't use that, and people that weren't loyal to their customer base would milk COVID much longer than they needed to.
Right.
But the question from Ian. So Ian said, coming out of the pandemic years, what should we have learned about what makes customers loyal and stay loyal even through times of crisis?
Well, I don't know if Ian is on the call, but if he is on the call, I'd be really interested to know what Ian's point of view is on that. I don't know, Ian, if you've got a chance to share your ideas, because I know we are very experienced in this area.
Yeah, Phil. I was thinking about the experiences that some of my clients are talking to me about in my coaching relationship with them here in South Africa. And it appears that they are seeing that their clients are at some point on a continuum that starts with continuing a survival strategy, or going through a period of recovery, or in a process of thriving and going from strength to strength. But whatever point on the continuum they find their clients or customers in, they are discovering that the thing that their clients are interested in more than anything else by far is what the supplier can do to contribute specifically to the customer's success in the situation that the customer finds themselves in. And that seems to be a little bit confusing and concerning for many sales leaders and salespeople, in that they're coming from a tradition of being primarily concerned with meeting targets, with displaying in an attractive manner the benefits, the solutions, the features of the products and services that they offer. And this idea of needing to specifically connect with customer concerns around what is going to contribute to the customer's success is something that's quite foreign to him. And being by nature pretty confident people, they're loath to share the confusion and concern, certainly with strangers. And they're really kind of thrashing around to find what is the new basis for relationship that they need to establish with their clients. And my reason for asking the question was to see, Phil, what you had through your experience and through your relationships with clients that might be helpful in steering salespeople and sales leaders in the right direction.
Got such a well put sort of reflection of your experiences in South Africa. I think I could answer this at a number of different levels, and one is at a compassion kind of level, in the sense that, you know, to what extent has your experience in South Africa suggested that no matter what state your customer's in, whether it's success or struggling or surviving, as you mentioned sort of earlier, has there been a more personal connection expected in the way salespeople are kind of relating to customers, a more human, if you like, approach, versus the target orientation that you've kind of mentioned earlier on. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. I do have a thought on it, which is my personal theory, but I'd be interested to know what you felt.
Phil, it seems as though the traditional approach by many sales leaders and sales professionals across a number of industries here,
yeah,
is this preoccupation with target and the preoccupation of their internal priorities,
yeah,
and need to switch to discovery and becoming curious about what it is that customers are currently focused on. It's that switch that seems to be a difficult metamorphosis to undertake.
Yeah, I think what you've mentioned there is something we see across so many of our different clients. But we've also seen clients, you know, for example, if you take the, you know, Ukrainian situation that we've got at the moment, and we've got clients who've got factories and teams of people, you know, in Ukraine and also Russia, and it's amazing to see the effort that's been made between our clients and their key distributors, let's say, or salespeople working in those countries to get them to, you know, to safety or to keep the show on the road. And so I'm you know, I suppose I've seen both ends of the spectrum. You know, I've seen organizations who are still very target orientated and sales focused, and they you know, they beat the sales teams up with not achieving targets in markets that have reduced perhaps sometimes quite drastically. But I've also seen organizations that have taken a hugely supportive role in sort of nurturing those particular customers that are really important to them, and really going out to them where, even with financial support, you know, to stop organizations going bust. So I suppose I find it difficult to generalize. I must admit, I was interested when the pandemic first hit to find out how many of our clients actually had reduced sales targets in order to you know, achieve their year's results. And I was rather surprised that very few had adjusted them. Yeah. we've also found that those companies that have actually either increased targets or reduced now have massive attrition problems. In one organization, they have 30% of their sales force. They've got vacancies for 30% of their sales force. They've got hundreds of salespeople. And this has been partly that the earnings potential has not been there because the targets have been so unrealistic, and so on. So, yeah, I don't know if I could generalize so much, Ian, but my sense is that what you kind of alluding to, this switch, is such an important issue, for selling organizations to switch from being supplier-centric to client-centric. In product-focused organizations, it's very difficult to get a shift of mindset, as I think we know. I don't know if I've added any more to the debate, Ian, but I've certainly seen, different approaches.
Yeah, Phil, I guess we've got to continue to work with our clients, probably on a case-by-case basis, to help them make that transition.
Absolutely. I think it's, yes, whether we call it transition or transformation is a really good, that's a discussion as well in its own right. Yeah. So, I agree. No, I think there'll be a lot of research done on things like attrition, mental health, and so on, looking at the way in which sales leaders have managed, during the pandemic, to keep their sales teams sort of focused in a period of incredible, challenge. So that's great. Luke, I don't know if there are any other questions that we might want to move on to.
We do. Before we do, thank you, Ian. Thanks for dialing in all the way from Johannesburg. Pleasure to have you on.
Yeah.
Well, we moved from Johannesburg to just down the road, actually, to Twickenham.
Okay.
With this quick question from Luke Stoneman Smith from Insone.
Okay.
And quite a broad question. He said, it's a bit of a hot debate for some. Are people born a salesperson or are they made into a salesperson?
Blimey, is Luke able to have joined us on the call?
I don't think he's able to join us today.
Okay. So are people, well, I think obviously, not obviously, I think there's certain personality traits that maybe lead one to become a salesperson. For example, if you are very introverted, for example, it might not be a profession that you choose to be in. and personality, I personally believe is not something you can change a great deal. So I think that I think from that side of things, personality wise, it's not possible to get huge changes in personality over time. But I do believe that it's entirely possible to actually train and develop people into becoming salespeople. And I never forget, in one of the very first jobs I had with a consulting firm, I was a junior consultant there, and the managing director of the firm, who was, sort of a very inspiring leader, he promoted someone who was in a secretarial role to become a junior consultant. And I think most of the team had seen this person as being in a secretarial role and therefore, not perhaps good enough to be in sales and as a junior consultant in sales. But within 1 year, this person had become one of the biggest performers of the team through obviously the training that this person received and so on. And I'll always remember that a combination of management recognizing potential plus the right type of education and training sort of equals potentially a very successful salesperson. And I think the stereotypes, I think that in the old days, the stereotype of the, white suited salesperson, I think that's gone. I think there's, they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and, very diverse backgrounds. And so I absolutely believe that people can be trained to sell. There's fundamental qualities you need around curiosity and interest in people, goes a long way. But you can provide frameworks and methods and techniques to be able to do this, and as such make sales a really rewarding career. So for Luke from Twickenham, I absolutely think they can be made. I don't think you have to be born, not many people are born knowing they want to be a salesperson. Normally people fall into it by accident, which is what happens. And then they find, actually, I'm quite good at selling over time.
I think there's certainly been a transition from people using the phrase salesman to salesperson.
Right.
And that, that's largely due to the fact everyone's becoming better at being, embracing diversity. But if you think of the term salesman, you then start to think of the gender stereotypes of someone who would work in sales. It immediately prescribes it's going to be a man. And then you think about the bad things associated with salesman over the years. So I think the term salesperson is a really positive trend for the industry. Anyone can be a person. And therefore it's open to everyone. And that's the beauty. And on the program, when I started, I had a very, very narrow view of what would make a good salesperson. But the stars from my program, and a lot of them were, I think they all became really good salespeople. They were just so different. One of the first activities we did, we looked at the Marilyn Reed personality types, and Tina, our tutor, Tina Dickens, asked us to stand in each corner of the room. She said, drivers over there, expressives over there, amiable, and we were all stood in different corners. Yet everyone at the end of the program, in my eyes, was a good salesperson. So
there you go.
If I was to answer Luke's question, I think they can absolutely be made.
Yeah.
And if you want to be made into a good salesperson, then come on one of our courses. Got to get a cheeky little bit of sales in there, Phil. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. We had a question. So let's have a look at what we've got. We had a question from Malika actually come through the chat function.
Yeah.
Malika's talked about the frustrations in sales. She said, how would you deal with the frustration of working on a deal for over a year only to end up losing it?
Well, that's I think we've all been in that position, Malika. So I think, how do you deal with the frustration? I'll never forget one particular deal that we'd worked on. It wasn't quite a year, but it was probably 6 months. And we found out later we were one of 200 suppliers that the customer gave the offer to pitch for a particular bid. They wanted to reduce the 200 sales training organizations down to 3. And we felt, because of our relationship with the client, that we're in a really good position. We worked really hard to put the deal together. The customer was very supportive in everything we asked them to do. And we pitched and we lost. And I remember the shock of losing that particular opportunity. It was massively important to the company, that client, and it was like you felt it was the worst thing that could have happened. So I'm going to answer this question. First of all, it was because of that loss that the company now Consali was created. Because when we did the win-loss review and we got feedback as to why we lost. It wasn't to do with our quality of our courses. It wasn't to do with the quality of the consultants involved. It was entirely to do with the capital structure of the business. They felt we weren't big enough to be able to cope with that particular opportunity. And the learning from that, so how do you deal with the frustration of losing, is recognizing that in every loss you get, there's a huge amount of learning. And in our case, it's led to the creation of Consalia, a joint venture, a very different balance sheet now to what we had at the beginning. And it meant that we were able to recompete for that HP deal, which we won back about 3 years later. So that, to some extent, you know, so I guess the message is, out of frustration that there's always of losing, there's always so many learnings you can get. And I personally learn more from losing something than winning it. But the other aspect to Malika's question that I think is really important is that if your pipeline is not strong enough, that you are really badly affected with the loss of one deal, then you've got problems. And so what tends to happen is that salespeople, I think we all generally kind of maybe count our chickens before they hatch, and we pin our hopes on that big deal, perhaps neglecting the strength of the pipeline that we've got. So those people who are able better to deal with the frustration of losing one deal knows that they've got another 7 deals, you know, in the pipeline that they're working on in any case. So it doesn't become, you know, quite so impactful. But of course, it's still frustrating. No one ever wants to lose. But for me, it's always been, it's where I've learned most lessons in life, I would say. And so part of being a salesperson is accepting rejection. You know, being able to deal with failure is a very important aspect, I think, of being a great salesperson. I don't know how you feel, Luke.
Yeah, well, I related to that because what I related to, you talk about I mean, Malika's question was quite transactional. You lose a deal, what are the frustrations of that? But for me recently, before I went on holiday, I was having a bit of a dry patch in sales. You know, nothing was going right. I wasn't getting any deals over the line. Bit of tunnel vision as we get in sales. But having come back, had the week away, chance to reflect, I've learned more about myself from that bad 2-week period than I would have had I had a really good 2 weeks. Or let's say a mediocre 2 weeks. So mediocre, let's say I got one company on board to do apprentices. You know, I'd be happy with that. I wouldn't learn anything from it. I'd think I'm God's gift to sales. You know, I'd be like, oh, I'm really good at this. I don't need to change.
Yeah.
But by having that sort of, I had a very frustrating 2 weeks, and having the time to reflect, I've come back and I've tried to think about what's working better. And I think so far this week, I've been doing things a little bit better than before. And that's it. So if you can get that little bit of growth, then we're on a good trajectory, even if the results aren't immediate.
Yeah. It's interesting that, you know, I remember talking to an artist who was talking about painting, and she made a comment about, for a painting to come alive, you need to have contrast. You know, if you paint a painting the same color, you don't really have a painting. There needs to be contrast. And I think the thing about sales is that we put ourselves in, you know, the contrasting emotions, you know, losing and winning. You know, there's a contrasting things that we're actually going through. But it's the contrast that it's what we learn, it's how we appreciate different experience, and what we learn from them is enabling us to get more value, if you like, more appreciation of the art in which we're working it. Our art is the art of selling, you know, but this you can't be happy all the time. You can't be perfect all the time. It's just not realistic. So you've got to deal with the ups and the downs and the frustrations and the the happy times.
Yeah. Yeah. Variety's the spice of life, eh?
Variety is the spice of life. Yes.
Indeed, yeah. We got we got a question. Probably might make that the finale, the final
Okay.
question.
Okay.
And I like this. It's a question because we are now really face to face in our interactions. So the question is, one of the most awkward things I find in sales is face to face networking and how to break into existing groups of people. Do you have any tips or best practice for face to face networking or breaking into existing groups?
Because that's it. Apart from drinking half a bottle of whiskey or something to get the courage. No, I know absolutely. The feeling about networking. Any tips? I think that one of the tips is realizing that if you feel slightly nervous about networking, everyone else is probably feeling slightly the same. And so I would go and find someone who perhaps isn't talking to anyone and go and approach them, and start a conversation with them. They're probably, like you, going to be relieved that someone's taken the initiative. I think it's a real skill because you've got a finite amount of time, and perhaps you want to sort of try and network with as many people around a room as you can. So to what extent do you stay with one person and then perhaps draw another person into your group if you see someone else who's not perhaps participating? But actually, I think it's coming back to the values that we talk about. It's being, a bit tactfully audacious and proactively creative in coming up with ways in which to engage people. I think it's very much a mindset thing. But I can understand. It's not an easy thing to do. But going into it with the mindset of, set yourself a goal, set yourself a target for how many new people you want to go and talk to, and then choose perhaps individuals who may not have anyone else to talk to you, and then sort of working the room. But it's amazing how much can happen from a chance meeting. Yeah, I'll never forget someone at Mott MacDonald, who is a big consulting engineer, who noticed that the mayor of London was standing on his own briefly at some cocktail reception, someone very important. And he was the only one that went up and introduced himself. Here I am from Mott's, and we're working with a lot of the rail transportation system in London, and I've really wanted to find the time to talk to you, and here we are. And actually what happened, and I wanted to introduce you to my chairman. And so his approach was very, he had the courage. He said he was a bit nervous doing it, but it's amazing, the results you can get from having that courage. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it myself, getting back out there. I've seen a lot on LinkedIn about how people who might suffer from anxiety have found lockdown quite satisfying because they've been able to lock themselves away. So it was a good question, and good to get your feedback and thoughts, because there are people out there who are going to be nervous about networking now that it's, I say hopefully, because I love doing it, but it's going to become more of a thing. So
maybe you can come and share with us your experiences on some future AMA session.
No, I just like that, meeting people and talking all sorts of nonsense, as you well know. So if anyone ever sees me at a networking event, come and talk nonsense with me. I quite like doing it. But we're at 6, so I wanted to firstly thank the guests that have come on, and really good to see you, and thank you for submitting your questions in advance as well.
And also just a note for Ian, if he's still on the call, looking forward to knowing, Ian, when you're coming over to London. We'd love to see you. Okay.
Good stuff. And Phil, thank you for being available to answer anything.
Yeah. Thank you, Luke. Yeah. Cheerio then.
Good to see
Bye-bye.
you.
Well done.
See you later, everyone.
Bye-bye.